Good morning, everyone. Today we are doing a different type of video as we are doing a reading wrap up of all of the books that I've read in the past 6 months. Now, autumn 2024 is when I really started to read fiction again. Prior to this, I was only reading self development, and then I got bored of that and decided that I wanted to just start to consistently read fiction books again. So, in September, because this was the first time I had read in a very long time, I essentially had to rediscover what type of books I like, what genre I liked. And so I was pretty much just guessing and making it up as I went along. The first book that I ended up picking up was called The Lost Bookshop. Now, this essentially followed two POVs in two separate timelines and followed their interactions with this specific bookshop. There were some mystical elements in this book. However, I did end up DNFing it. I just got bored and it wasn't my type of book, and I realized that I preferred actual fantasy books over ones that just had a bit of mystery in there. And so it didn't quite do it for me. So I did end up DNFing it. That is how we started off our reading journey again. However, the second book that I picked up was called The Wishing Spell. Now, this was actually a children's fantasy book. The reason I picked this up is because I realized that I do enjoy fantasy and I just wanted a simple book that would just help me get back into the habit of reading. I wanted something that wasn't too complicated, which is why I chose a children's fantasy. This was also actually part of a series, so if I ever find myself where I want something light-hearted but a little bit adventurous, and I know it's going to have like an easy ending, like a nice ending, then I will probably pick these up just as more of a palate cleanser than anything else. But this was a fun read. I would say this is about 3.5 stars. It was fun. I enjoyed it. It did what I wanted it to do, and I also read this during September. Then I realized that I enjoyed fantasy books. I started to look more at specifically the fantasy genre. I started to watch a bit more content and just find out people's recommendations. That is when I picked up this book, One Dark Window. This is part of a duology, and I loved both of these. These welcomed me back into not only reading, but specifically reading fantasy books. They reminded me and helped me to rediscover my love of reading and reading this specific genre. I loved these. Now, in One Dark Window, we follow our main character, Elspeth, who essentially has a monster living inside of her head. And she lives in a world where her specific type of magic is outlawed. So we essentially go through the story watching her survive. There is found family, there is adventure, there is a romance. I loved this book. And then the second book continues the story. I also loved this. There was more adventure. We got a couple of other characters' POVs as well, which I really enjoyed. Both of these are 5-star reads. This is a 5-star duology for me. I will definitely be keeping an eye out for this author, Rachel Gillig. She actually does have a book coming out in May, which is the first book to another duology in a separate world. So I would definitely be reading that. But I just absolutely loved these books. I am going to be rereading them very soon and annotating them and just immersing myself back into this world. I absolutely love this. Yes. These are described as dark gothic fantasy. In terms of the dark aspect, that's more about the atmosphere rather than the actual content. I really enjoyed these and I look forward to reading more books by this author. At this point, I had realized that I enjoyed fantasy books, and I ended up going to a bookstore and picking up Upon a Frosted Star. First of all, the cover was gorgeous and I liked the premise of it. This is essentially set in 1920s England. It definitely has its origins from The Great Gatsby because we have our main character, Forster, who is a starving artist. And every year there are these elaborate parties that are thrown and no one knows who the actual host is. And essentially our main character is intrigued by this woman. However, as I continued to read this book, the main character annoyed me. He didn't have much development. It just felt like he was complaining a lot. He was not infatuated by this woman. It felt more like an obsession. And the friendships that we had in the start of the book kind of were dismissed as we got a bit more into the story and more of the mysteries around the story. So I did not enjoy it. I didn't DNF it, but I did skim read like the last half of the book. This is a 1-star for me. This was not great. This brings us to the next book that I picked up in November. So This is called The Book That Wouldn't Burn. We have two POVs. One is a guy who is trapped in this huge library, and the second POV is this girl where she essentially has to survive this world that she lives in. And I just got very, very bored of this. I did DNF it. As you can see, my bookmark is still where I left off, which is just before the halfway point. I just got really bored. There felt like there wasn't much development, not much was happening. This just really, really bored me, which I was sad about because I was excited to read a book that was based in like a huge library. But yeah, I didn't enjoy it. And it's a very chunky book. So for me to feel like there wasn't enough development in this much of the story wasn't good. So I did end up, unfortunately, DNFing it. Now, at this point, so about midway through November, I was definitely watching a lot more content about reading and fantasy books and just looking at more recommendations. And this is when I discovered ACOTAR. So, throughout the end of November and all of December, I read all of these books and I loved it. This is a 5-star series for me, absolutely. A Court of Thorns and Roses, I really enjoyed, but this is a 4-star for me. Once I read these two, I realized that this first one wasn't as good, but this is a 4-star. These two, 5-star, loved the found family, loved the adventure, loved so much of these two books. The fourth book, I know a lot of people complain about this, but I actually really enjoyed it. I did read it around the holiday season, which might be why I enjoyed it a bit more. I can understand that if you're reading it maybe in summer, that you maybe won't enjoy it as much because you're not in the holiday spirit or season. But I enjoyed just seeing the characters and the found family have some fun when they're not about to go to war. So I really enjoyed this. And the fifth book, this is a 4-star for me. I enjoyed it a lot. I enjoyed getting other characters' POVs, getting their experiences, and just exploring more of the world. So I absolutely loved this series. I would definitely be reading more of the installments, and I would definitely be reading more of SJM books because I loved her writing as well, and just the prose in these books was so magical. And you really just get immersed in the world and the characters and the story. Absolutely loved it, and now I understand why it is such a recommended and huge book in the fantasy, romantasy world. So, loved these. Then we have the 3 books that I have read in January and February of this month. So I read Fourth Wing in Jan, and then I read these two in Feb. Now, overall, this series is a 4-star series for me so far. Fourth Wing, 4-star, Iron Flame, 3-star. I did not enjoy this that much. I found some of the dynamics trivial. Some aspects just felt like filler. I just didn't enjoy it as much as I wanted to. And actually, after I read Iron Flame, I was going to stop reading the series, but I had already bought Onyx Storm, so I ended up continuing, and I'm so glad that I did because Onyx Storm really brought me back into the world, into the characters. Onyx Storm was a lot of fun and made me feel like Fourth Wing again. So overall, this is a 4-star read for me, and I will be continuing this series. A lot of these books are quite well known in the fantasy world. However, because I was just coming back into it, it took me a minute to discover them, and now that I have found so many other books and authors and recommendations that I'm so excited to read, so many series that I can delve into that I'm so excited for. I also found that reading these during autumn and winter specifically was just so fun, so cozy, made me enjoy these seasons so much more, and just have a hobby that I can really enjoy during those colder and darker months as well. I am definitely a fantasy book reader. I do perhaps want to read some high fantasy books, but we'll see because I have a lot on my TBR already and I'm excited to read them. I'm not going to run out of books to read anytime soon, which is so fabulous. That is it for this video, and I will see you in the next one. Happy reading!